let's get deep and shallow at the same damn time. The death of Christ contrasted to the death of Socrates. I assume you were taught, because this is the normal white bread American way to teach the death of Jesus, that he didn't do nothing wrong, that he was persecuted for no reason, that he was innocent, right?
I guess so.
And in the book, if you actually just read the Gospels, Jesus Christ is completely, utterly guilty of the charges being laid against him, right? So I'm looking at you. I got to look at the camera. Do you want to move forward a little bit, babe?
Yeah.
Sorry to bother you, but
No,
I can't really be turning around.
Cool.
Jesus goes into the temple to cast out the money changers. He runs into the room where the Pharisees are eating dinner, and he steals the food off their table, right? He does all these things that are obviously, in a word, impious. He utterly and thoroughly deserves to be accused, tried, and convicted of this crime. And the gospel spells it out for you. There's no question that he's guilty. And yet everyone tells this story as, oh, poor little Jesus, he didn't do nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Okay? So Socrates, what I think dramatically is the real impact of the Euthyphro, and this may not be obvious on a first reading, or may not be obvious if you actually don't know how the story ends, # spoilers, Socrates is killed. Socrates is guilty. Socrates is guilty as a motherfucker. Socrates, like Jesus, if you just read the story, it's setting out for us really clearly that he is guilty of impiety, that he is a heretic. And his particular type of heresy, it was worth talking about. I mean, it's a Socratic method and free thinking and progress and questioning your assumption and all that stuff. But we got a contrast here. There's another source not enough people read. This was not at all. I mean, I don't remember anyone in my university ever mentioned this. So this is Xenophon's Memorabilia, right? And memorabilia in this case, it's actually memories of Socrates, if you like. It's the record of things Socrates said and did. So in this and other works by Xenophon about Socrates, he's defending the memory of Socrates. Long story short, he's trying to make it seem that Socrates did nothing wrong, that Socrates was perfectly pious, that Socrates never corrupted the youth, the different charges against Socrates he was innocent of.
Yeah.
I think exactly what makes Euthyphro such an impactful work is that it's showing you the opposite.
Yeah.
Is that Socrates is totally, utterly guilty.
Yeah.
This is a heretic. This is heresy, and he is laughing at and mocking, the religion of his day. Mm-hmm. And this is a society which, I mean, it's an interesting society. Okay, what else? Why else did Socrates have to die? One, he was the teacher of Alcibiades. So that's totally outside of this particular dialogue. Yeah. It does come up in both versions of the Apology. I think all the accounts of the trial and death. Mm-hmm. One of his students goes on to be the most notorious turncoat imaginable, switching sides and fighting against Athens, he's a major general and political leader and military leader, and he goes and fights against Athens for the Spartans. So that's a big deal. And even someone like Xenophon... Yep. You're mad suspect, bro. You're a little bit sus. You switch sides on us, right? Yeah. So this is another student of Socrates who becomes pro-Spartan, and even Plato. It's in there. Plato's a little bit too. He's a little bit too pro-Spartan. Yeah. It comes across a lot of the time. So for some reason, all of your students are kind of on the wrong side, Socrates. So even in the Apology, he makes it very clear that he was on the right side. Well, he's telling his side of the story. Mm-hmm. Right. So politically, he is a bit suspect, right?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. What do you jump in? Why did Socrates have to die? Why did Socrates have to die? You tell me.
Well, I mean, part of it has to do with democracy, like the fact that when you get people together as a group, it can lead to decisions that
mob justice.
Yeah, right. And in what I've read, it seemed like just a couple days after the people that had made the decision kind of regretted what they did and thought it over. They're like, oh, wait.
Right.
But
okay, but look. Sorry, this is super spontaneous, but don't you think that's also what the Euthyphro is setting you up for? Because Euthyphro is questioning what is piety, what is justice. People think they know, but they don't really know. I think you got at it well in your analysis. You said, well, ultimately it's just human. It's a human convention. It's human beings coming together and deciding this. Mm-hmm. guess what that means? It means mob justice. It means
Right.
Socrates has to die.
Right. It means that at whatever time that you're living in, you have to follow the rules. You have to go with what has been set down by humans at the time, and
Right.
you can be before your time or after your time. You
can be in the wrong culture. You can be in the wrong person. Okay,
Right.
okay. So here's another question for you. Okay, Jesus, Batman.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference? They're stories people made up and they believe in and have credence, right?
Yes.
Now, in Socrates' time, you got the legend of Zeus and Kronos, or any particular legend about Zeus, right? And you've got new legends, new stories like Batman being made up at the theater. That, for me, that's reason number 3 why Socrates has to die, right? There was a comedy made up about Socrates, and this comedy was full of accusations, aspersions against his character, including, one of the main points was that Socrates was just out for money and he was corrupting the youth, and that he was a stereotypical sophist. He says he's not motivated by money, but really it's all about making money out of peddling philosophy and so on. That's all in there, right? And this sets him up. This sets the public against him. Ultimately, this mentioned at his trial. He says, well, many of you have these misconceptions about me because there was a hit play. Again, in its day, this is like a hit movie in its day. They don't have a cinema. They have the theater. They have live theater. And this is the Batman. This is the big, pop culture spectacle of its day.
Yeah.
And Socrates was the butt of a few too many jokes down at the theater. So he has to die.
Yeah, well, the main difference today is obviously people don't take Batman so seriously that they would kill for him. And at the time, people did take Jesus so seriously that...
So I disagree. I think people do kill because of Batman. I think they do. And I think it shapes people's moral perception. And I think people get into fistfights, and there's exactly their sense of justice is shaped by stories like Batman. And I took this up with my students in China. I spoke to them at quite some length. Because actually my students in China, I presented them with Plato. We went through Plato. And I said, look, Plato, he thinks it's a really big deal. What are we teaching children in these legends, in these traditions? It's one of the big questions Plato asks. Because indeed, when you look at the ancient Greek legends, they're all horribly immoral in obvious ways. They're about murdering your own father and stuff, right? There's rape, and it just kind of makes no sense as terms of an ethical teaching for children. So why are we teaching this stuff to kids? What do we expect from kids of this? But I was asking the Chinese students in China, because they're familiar with Batman, but from a distance. It's like, okay, so what do you guys think about Batman? Why do Americans teach this to children? Would you teach this to children? You as a parent or you as a teacher, what do you think is the moral impact of this on kids? So it's interesting to lead them in that kind of examination.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I do think Batman has that kind of impact on people.
Yeah. No, that is really interesting to compare the cultures too. Because obviously here, in the Western world, it's totally cool to teach your kids about Batman.
Right.
Well, little kids walk around in Batman costumes. They know, they have, from an early age, they get this sense of what is justice and what is, killing bad guys. This is really what justice is all about.
Well, right, and Batman will beat people up, but he won't murder them.
Yeah,
lines. No, but those lines matter a lot.
Not familiar enough with comic
books.
No,
but it's mentioned. I think that often is exactly what I don't know, parents or the authors feel. Oh, Batman, he beats people up, but then he leaves them at the police station. He just beats them up and ties them up. That's why the Joker never gets killed. He keeps wraps up the Joker in a chain and leaves him in front of the police station to be arrested.
They just do that so that the story can continue.
Well, yeah, of course. No, but it's a trope. But look, really, the religion of Athens in this time also isn't really the religion of Zeus, of the most ancient mythology. This more recent body of mythology, which is Homer. The Odyssey and the legends surrounding what was originally a real war. There was an actually historical war between, over Helen of Troy. Make a long story short, war with King Priam and all this other stuff. They put together an army and what have you. And the opening of Thucydides discusses that. And Thucydides he gives estimates for how many people were involved with the war and how many ships. And he says actually the scale of that war wasn't terribly big, compared to wars as they've progressed. But nevertheless, that's really the Batman of its day, and in a lot of ways, that's also the Jesus of its day, and so on. And they had formal religious festivals for what were originally historical characters, in that drama, in those events. Specific sailors, soldiers, and archers, and some of that stuff is extant and some of it's not. So that's very alien to us. The idea of, but it was showing young man, this is virtue. This is what it means to be a man, is to be like this specific soldier in this specific war, as remembered in this specific poem that you have to memorize and recite and see acted out at the theater. Because in the theater, it really was a religious ceremony in many ways. And again, and that's why Socrates had to die. Socrates must die.
So the religion.
That's the subtitle. Euthyphro. Socrates must die. For me, that's the dramatic tension of this. Is that if you're reading it, this is absolutely, the clock is ticking down to this man being executed. And, in a sense, he's being wrongfully executed. It's horribly immoral. Don't get me wrong. It's like saying the Spanish Inquisition is moral or immoral. It's horribly immoral, sure.
Yeah.
But he's guilty of the crime. This is showing you that he's guilty and exactly in what way.
Right. And you have to look at it in the context of the time period. Whether somebody is guilty or not depends on the time and the culture.
But I think all of us, like Socrates, want to transcend our times. I mean, that's the point. You and I don't want to live in the confines of what we've inherited in 2018. I didn't want to live in the reality of 1989, back when it was 1989 either. I mean, that's the tragedy. We're all struggling to transcend our times.
Right, and there's
to transcend the mediocrity of the assumptions, cultural, political, economic, that we're born into.
It takes so long for the law to catch up with what is, in the public opinion of what is right and wrong. Like, just for example, the laws for the internet have not caught up to what has the technology of today. Like, it's
so many obvious things. Sure.
Yeah.
And it seems like nobody cares. That also stirs me. I've been reading Aristotle's Politics again, and just the way these books talk about legislation. It's heartbreaking because you realize we live in a country today where nobody cares about legislation.
Yeah, they just care about public opinion,
right?
Like what you just said. Like now we've been getting emails from like the updated privacy policies from every single like social media thing that you could possibly be signed up to, because public opinion now is against Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook.
Even the junk mail from Parliament. Because I didn't even bother showing you. We got junk mail from Parliament. They're all just. I'm sorry, I don't want to use such coarse language. But, I mean, they're all just ambulance chasing. They're all just chasing issues that are in the media. So we got junk mail from Parliament like, oh, do you think Canada should have a law against plastic littering the ocean? And this is the most cynical thing. Someone in Parliament is just trying to chase up public support. Like, oh, this issue's hot. Let me get my shingle out there, Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny, though. Sorry. But, Aristotle in the Politics, he says something. Well, I think most people would regard as evil. But I think it's profoundly morally good. He says, look, there are these various sciences, but when you really think about it, the queen of the sciences, the ultimate science, all of this is politics. Ultimately, whatever you want to talk about in the sciences, the apex of the sciences is politics. It all comes down to human social relations, human organization, and legislation. Mm-hmm. And that's what all men of talent and brilliance and ability must bend their minds toward and bend their efforts towards, is worrying about the future of their city and its morality, its legislation, its politics, its vitality, etc. And nobody thinks that way in the modern world. And what today is at the apex? I mean, I think a lot of people would say consumerism. I think a lot of people would say, you're ultimately everything you're doing is bent towards owning a fancy car or something. For other people, I mean, okay, for a few people it's theoretical physics or the progress of medical science. I mean, I know there's some people who have some other, but even people who are very altruistically inclined, they may say it's charity work or washing the feet of the poor or something, but it's not politics in the market. So nobody cares. That's the tragedy.
Yes, right. But even in a time in ancient Athens, this is when people were motivated. This is when people were caring about these things, and
that's why Socrates had to die.
That's why Socrates had to die. What would happen today if people were motivated?
Right.
Who would be on trial?
No, but
Donald Trump would have been out of office by now if people actually gave a shit.
Look, keep it on the real. What you used this example already in your video. You said, well, you think factory farms should be illegal. Another one, I know. Ask yourself, Isaac agreed with me on this. Leather shoes, whatever. From our perspective today, the idea that this is even a debate, the morality and legality of leather shoes, is laughable, right? So if we lived in a society where people care, you're right. Socrates has to die. This is going to create a certain kind of intense conflict. Yeah. But that would also be a society where those debates would would matter, where they'd involve, I think the best and brightest, and so on.
Yeah.
I was just reading, a brilliant article. I emailed it to you. It's really brief, from a career lawyer who's now going to waste the rest of her life doing boring paperwork. It was this really brief article about a fundamental, horrible ethical issue for First Nations people. These kids in a small town burnt down, basically like the lunatic asylum they were forced to live in. So it wasn't a lunatic asylum. It's what was called a residential school in Canada. It's part of our history of and the saddest thing is in reading this article, even in how it introduces itself, this is the most marginal question in Canadian politics today. Oh, genocide. It's some incredibly marginal, unthought of, unresolved. It's at the bottom of the pile of our social priority. Yeah. It's fascinating. It's important. There are all these practical consequences of it, including, like, in this case, who actually owns the land, is linked to this. There are all kinds of consequences that still matter today. And nobody cares, right? So yeah, and the opposite, the hyper-vigilant end of the spectrum, we have this period of ancient Athens where, it's dragging your own father on murder charges. Yeah. Dragging your own father, dragging Socrates for impiety. It becomes, hyper-vigilant in its concept of the law.
Yeah.
And then, the next step after that is Sparta, where the law becomes a tyrant beyond all imagining, right?
Yeah. I think part of the reason, part of the message of Euthyphro is that, like, governments should be a safeguard so that people don't become so pious that they're, like, cruel. Like...
Oh, that's an interesting observation. Okay, I didn't get that as this one, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think... We don't get the result of what happened with Euthyphro's indictment against his father, but I gather from what I've read that generally at the time something like this would have just been thrown out.
Right, that's right.
Because it defied common sense. Like, why would you indict your own father for this? It's obviously... we get it. You're so pious. You're so pious.
The point is, it would have been probably a death penalty offense for the murderer anyway. That's the implicit. But yeah, go on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, so instead of
instead of him getting a fair trial before he was killed, right. But yeah.
Yeah. So.
But you're saying this gives a sense that the state should be a check on the.
Yeah, but then it's not with the case of Socrates. Right. So it is kind of this weird contrast between the two that are these two cases that are they're talking with each other from different sides of the trial. Socrates is a defendant, and Euthyphro is the plaintiff, and
right. Look, Socrates. He's really a believer in personal, individual virtue. And that's what he's going around trying to inspire in people, to get them motivated to reform themselves. And I think that's a good. It's kind of he's a moralist. He's a street preacher.
Yes.
That's what he's really going around doing. And I think the next generation, Plato, Aristotle, etc. Instead, their obsession is with public education, and the idea that the state can reform and all of society can improve through public education. Not Socratic method, not one-on-one, me asking you, so, what do you think virtue is? Or what do you think, this kind of thing, but of universal mandatory public education. I think, what's interesting about democracy, whether you have a little bit of it or a lot of it, as soon as those, terrible life and death decisions are being made by the mob or being made by the people, it forces you to care passionately about public education. Because, oh God, how can we have this if we live in a society where people believe in witches and carry on witch trials?
Right.
Which this kind of is. that's kind of what's happening here in the Euthyphro.
Yeah, it's a witch trial against
But it's also, what happened in the United States, in the 17th century.
Yep.
And so on. So, sorry, I recently had a debate about education with an anarcho-capitalist on this. And I was really having to hammer home to him because he was selling the lie that before government intervention, public education was just fine. Before the public sector, before government got involved. And I was saying to him, no. What do you mean fine? Everyone's illiterate. People believe in demons. People literally carry out witches. How do you define fine? How have you been to Saudi Arabia? What's fine? So, I think that is an interesting thing, is that sharing power with the masses or entirely handing over the masses then puts you into a crisis of public education. Do you trust the people? Do you trust a jury of your peers? In this, 500 of your peers, maybe 3,000 of your peers. Do you trust them to judge you, and to judge you kindly and honestly, or would you rather have one judge, one experience? I know the terror of that. I'm sorry, but my divorce proceedings with my ex-wife. It's unbelievably awful. This one person has this power over me on the basis. I mean, this person knows me less than a viewer on my YouTube channel. You think she could get a better sense of my character from watching my YouTube videos?
That's right.
And there's no consideration given to me or who I am or what have you. So and it's all hangs on one person's character and one person's attention span and their care and their kindness,
sympathy,
right, and their sympathy and their fairness and their good judgment. And even a reasonably good judge has got to be wrong once in a while.
Yes.
But do you want to stand there like Socrates and say, "Don't kill me, I'm a heretic," but it's for the greater good. But you should value. That's really what this is about. But you should value my dissent.
Yes.
I'm a heretic who's making your society stronger. This is his theory of the gadfly. Like I may be nipping at you, I may be biting at you, but it's making you stronger.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the answer is public education, or that's how I would feel more comfortable with having the masses determine whether I'm guilty of a crime or not.
Right. So if
I know that they have been through this public education system that supposedly should teach them.
Teach them what is piety. Teach them
right. As you say, this critical thinking, this thinking for themselves.
Right. But that's not what comes out with Plato, right? Because Plato's obsession is that what you have to teach the next generation is good and evil. And in a sense, that even makes sense. Of course, it's partly just because Plato's a maniac, but whatever. Plato's a really eccentric guy, the more you read him. But, if you think about it, that is itself, it's understandable just as a response to the death of Socrates. Like what people need to know is good and evil. They don't need Socrates asking you, can you explain to me what's good and evil? They need the government to set this down in public education. Everyone's got to know good and evil, and everyone's got to read the same storybook. We got to replace Batman with a story that really explains to you good and evil with no ambiguity. That's what Plato, what the next generation did. And of course, and then the next generation after that is Aristotle, who basically pisses all over everything Plato had to say. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the next generation after that isn't extant. It seems like Carneades was a really brilliant philosopher on this exact issue of justice. Because Carneades, his philosophy is described in Cicero, but it's not extant. It wasn't preserved by the Christian church. I'm guessing it was a little too scary from a Christian perspective. But yeah. So it kept on turning, and then it's gone, and then it's the Dark Ages. When we all know the meaning of justice is taking people and literally breaking them on the wheel, literally torturing them to death in the public square in the name of a religion where your God died in a public execution.
Man. At least Socrates died by drinking hemlock, right?
Yeah, right.
Come on, he wasn't tortured, hanged in front of a crowd of people.
So look, man. I mean, guys, I don't even know. Is this going to go on your channel? You can edit this. You can edit this in or not. It's your call. But look, I ask you, why celebrate Christmas? If you guys want to, you can revive. There's an ancient, festival for the birthday of Socrates. But I mean, you can replace Christmas. There have been all these attempts made to replace Christmas with something meaningful, like Kwanzaa and what have you. Mm-hmm. But I mean, really, I think it is a tremendously meaningful story to tell, and you can teach it to your children. It's a lot more meaningful than Jesus being born in a manger or something. And I mean, in many ways, the story of the death of Socrates, it's the real Jesus before Jesus. It's that sense of all of society bears the sin for this death.
Yeah,
we're all complicit in his execution.
It really is.
Yeah. All right. Any last thoughts?
No.